All right, let's get started with these fabric pumpkins. So to get started, you have to have your fabric choices. You can use any fabric really that you want. This is just a quilting cotton, and I've chosen a lot of fall colors. But really, you could use scraps, you could use anything you have around. I've made these before out of old clothing, like sentimental clothing, a sweater of a friend. I made a quilt for her, a t-shirt quilt, and when I was finished, the leftover scraps I used to make these little pumpkins out of to make it a little bit more heartfelt. So you really can use anything. They can be any size. The particular size that I'm working with here, this started out as one long piece of fabric that was 22 inches long by about 8 inches high. But I've got a whole pile of these fabrics right over here, right there in the corner, and they are all different sizes. So it really does not matter. If you look at the ones that are already made here, even they obviously started out as different sizes because the final product is a different size. So what you'll need to do is, if you have just cut your fabric pieces, again, this one is about 22 inches long by 8 inches tall, and then you'll just want to fold it with right sides together and then do a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. On this one, it has a pretty narrow selvage and there's not much of a print on the selvage, so we didn't even cut the selvages off. I just used that. If you did have a print or some text on your selvage that you want to get rid of, you may want to cut it off first and then do your 1/4 of an inch seam, or sorry, 1/2 inch seam. It really doesn't matter as long as it's holding. So the seam is in on this already. So the next step, you're going to take a rubber band. You could also do this with embroidery floss by just wrapping it a whole bunch of times, but you're going to end up wanting to do something like this, where your fabric bunches all up on one end. And I, on this one, just used a rubber band to secure that. But in order to make this happen, I'm going to open up my fabric, and then I'm just going to start kind of gathering it up. And try to get it a little bit straight across the top, and then just grab a rubber band. And I would guess this is about a 1/2 inch from the top. You'll just start twisting that rubber band. You want it to be really tight. You don't want your stuffing to come out, and you also don't want your rubber band too close to the end where it might slip off. Okay, so once you have the rubber band on the end, then you can flip your pumpkin inside out. Okay, from this point you can already start to tell like the shape that it's going to be, and if you like the shape of it or not. This did not catch all of it, so I need to start over. I'm going to go back, and you want to do that. You want to double check to make sure that all of that opening is secured in your rubber band. That rubber band broke. We don't want that one. All right, so I'll check this out again, flip it inside out, and this time I can tell that I did catch every bit of it. So I've got all of the fabric, and now I flip it inside out. It's gonna look just like that. Okay, the next thing you're gonna do is you're gonna take a large embroidery needle. You don't want one huge, like so big that it's gonna make giant holes in your fabric, but you also definitely don't need anything small. This is not a dainty job. My needle threaded, and this is an entire strand of embroidery floss, so it's got 6 threads. And you do want a very long piece. Usually I just recommend about an 18-inch piece if you're just using embroidery floss for standard reasons, but for this I want it to be really, really long. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make the knot at the end. And that's just the little trick to get your knot. I just twist it around the needle. Okay, so I've got a nice knot there. I'm gonna trim off the excess. Okay, so I'm gonna have my knot on the inside of my pumpkin. And I'm gonna start this out kind of by the seam. So I'm starting out with my needle inside, and I'm just gonna do a running stitch that goes all the way around the top. I'm about a 1/2 inch from the cut edge, and I just gather all the fabric up on my needle, and once I have filled the needle, I'll just push it through, and then you can do that one stitch all the way through. There's my knot, finally found its way in. And now I'll just keep going. So I'm gonna go, about a ½ inch away. Needle just goes in and out, in and out. It's just a running stitch. So I've got this really big pile of stuffing here, and this may or may not even be enough. One of the probably biggest mistakes I see when these are made, or when any pillow or anything that we're using batting or stuffing with, is, especially with students, they don't stuff them full enough, and so then they get really kind of flat. I really like to use, in this project, I like to use a ton of stuffing. It just ends up looking a lot nicer, and it looks a lot more realistic. Even though I said these could be kind of an abstract looking pumpkin, they're not all gonna look exactly the same. You still want them to look like a pumpkin. You wanna know when you're looking at it that it is a pumpkin. And so one way to ensure that is just really stuffing them really, really full. And it's kind of poking out the top, that's okay. That's okay. You almost want that because then you know that area is gonna fill up when you start closing up the top. That's pretty full. Now what I need to do, I'm gonna go back to that end thread that I was using for the running stitch, and I'm just gonna start pulling it in tighter and tighter, and I just keep stuffing the batting in. What you can do if it's all bunching in one spot and staying flat in others, you can start like shifting it around and moving it over wherever you need. Okay, but I'm gonna just keep pulling and pulling. And at this point, I don't have to be finished. If I'm looking at it and I'm like, yeah, I don't love that, that needs more stuffing, I can open it right back up and pop a little bit more in there. Maybe I squish it down into the right spots that need it, and then just close it right back up. So it's a work in progress. Okay, so work with yours, get it as stuffed as you can, and then pull that string to close it back up. Okay, so now I have gotten mine as full as I think I can get it. And what I'm gonna do next is I'm just gonna secure close this top. You kind of just have to squeeze it all together with your fingers. I'm still pulling on that embroidery floss, and I'll just take it all the way through the layers. If you don't catch them all, that's okay, because you'll be doing this over and over again. So I'm gonna squeeze it closed again. And now I'm gonna go from where I'm at, go back through some more layers. See how it kind of loosened up? That's okay, we will fix it. But I better fix it now before I do the next stitch. So I just pulled really, really tight. One thing I should have mentioned earlier is that the embroidery floss color does matter. So you will see this embroidery floss. That's why I'm starting with such a long strand, is because I'm going to use it to wrap my pumpkin later. So all I'm doing here is just taking it back through those layers to try to close it up and secure it. All right, that's it for that phase. So I've got it all bunched up, closed tight. Now what you're going to do is you're going to take that thread, I'm going to pull it around the pumpkin, and then I'm just going to make a little segment. So see, oops, okay, let me do that again. So I'm going to start from up here. I'm going to go around, all the way around. Then when I get back to the top, I'm going to make a little segment, and that's this right here. So I'm going to go back around. Now on this side, I've made a little segment. Intersect at the top again, go back around, and you'll just keep doing that until you have a whole bunch of intersecting points and a bunch of little segments that make up your pumpkin. And so this is why I started with such a long embroidery floss. So I haven't had to make any cuts so far. I think that's probably enough. So another thing to note is that I'm pulling these really tight. So I'm pulling these really tightly. If you don't, then you won't get the segmentation that I think looks really nice. Okay, so I get it back to the top. I'm just going to go back through some of the layers one more time.